In this demonstration, we're going to take a look at the new features of the next generation Config Audit as part of the Config Drift and Audit app. So here we are on the dashboard. To get into the Config Drift and Audit app, we use the left pane and you use your choices over here, and you navigate into Config Drift and Audit and navigate into your audit policies. And so from this view, you're not going to see much different, but what I want to do is click into one of the audits here. And let's take a look at some of the differences that 4.2 has introduced. Okay, this audit has been run, so let's go ahead and navigate into the editor. And so what I'd like to do to really show you the differences is show you a side-by-side comparing it with Gluware and prior to 4.2. So one of the things you'll notice is when you navigate into your audit, and let me navigate into the same audit and navigate right into the editor. In the old version of audit, your rules were displayed in an expanded type of format, and you navigate through like this. And you can see the rules as required or forbidden and some parameters here. So one of the things you're going to notice right away is the next generation audit has carryover, so it's fully backwards compatible with old audits. You have your name, description. One of the new things that's introduced is a permission level that's tied into role-based access control, so you have 3 levels of permission. And then we have a new grid display for your audit rules. So what you're going to see here is, if you look at this, a new column and new capability is tagging the severity of an audit rule, and we'll dig into that a little bit more. But first of all, this grid format is going to present you with the ability to very quickly and easily look through your rules: severity, name, description, source, OS, concept items if there's queries tied to them, and so on. What you do have carryover as well is, in the old version, you could clone and you could change the order of the rules, and you could delete the rules. All those actions are now here. You can edit your rule, you can clone your rule, you can delete them, and you can change the order. But one of the ways you can change the order is the drag and drop capability. So you can drag a rule around and change the order in your audit. So let's jump into editing one of these rules, and let's look at the difference here. So now as you jump into edit a rule, you get to a little bit more of a comparable view, what you had in prior to 4.2. So you're going to see a couple things where now you have the option of selecting the source. The source being the latest snapshot is when you're executing audits or you're executing config drifts. If you're instructing Gluware to capture the config, we're going out and capturing the latest configuration, and that becomes the latest snapshot. If you have performed a configuration and you flag it as your default snapshot, then it is that parameter. But generally with a drift and audit, what you want to audit and keep looking at is the latest snapshot and continuing on from there. So that is the default. Then you have the operating system that this rule is tied to. Since you're going to be putting in a rule that is CLI based, CLI and regex based, you're going to have to tell it which operating system, and you can choose from any of the supported operating systems. Concept item is for when you're using Gluware and config modeling. We understand particular configured features like AAA or DNS or NTP. And in that case, Gluware is not going to look at, when auditing, it's not going to look at the entire configuration and search through an audit. Gluware is going to execute the show command to look at just the snippet of that piece and just look at that feature. So it's a little bit advanced, out of scope for the demo today. We'll leave it out, but understand that feature is still there. And then you still have the ability to define the scope in regular expression, very useful. But here's where the big difference comes into play. The old rule type was what we now define as a simple audit policy or rule, which it is required or forbidden. So that translates into the new UI as a simple rule. You can then use a drop down to add more layers to the assessment. Must contain, must not contain, with regex, must contain ordered, must contain only. So this is expanded, but it does encompass these flags that you saw in the previous version of saying it must have all these statements, it must be in this order, or the only option. So the only being that you can't have other components around what you're specifying. So you can see some expansion here in the rule set. But the biggest change in this release and the most power comes from the addition of the logical operators. So you can add in the if-then and the if-then-else type of commands, and we're going to get into that. Another really cool and powerful capability is the ability to test the rule, and we're going to look at that next. And essentially, this is where you're defining your rule. So from a comparison view, those are the main things to kind of understand when you're kind of comparing the previous version to the new version. The other thing you will see is in your settings, when you go into your organizational settings and you go into your role-based access controls, roles. Let me move this over a bit. When you go into roles and you look at, I think I'm a system developer in this case. So if I view my role-based access control, config, drift, and audit, you have additional parameters here of exposing more role-based access controls around level 1 and level 2 and level 3 audits. So you're layering in some capabilities and again can tie it to the role-based access control. So with that quick summary, let's go ahead and minimize this guy and maximize this view, and let's get back into drift and audit. And I just want to take this a little bit further to show you an example of audits and how they can go a little bit more in a little bit more depth. So let's go ahead and view this rule I've created. And here's where the power of the new config audit comes into play. And this one comes up all the time. Hey, I want to audit for a parameter, but I want to do a conditional, and I want to say if something, like if my host name contains NA for North America, then my configuration must contain these specific NTP servers as part of the configuration. So this is actually kind of fun when you start to think about how expansive this gets into, but you can look at, if my operating system, or if the IP address, or if the, any of these conditions, if the serial number, if the SKU, if the zone, you have a lot of parameters to dig into, and then you have a lot of other operators like equal or not equal or begins with or contains, and then you can add your parameter and compare. So again, in this use case, I'm saying if the NTP server, if the host name contains NA, which is a flag for North America, it must contain this. So let's jump into the second, kind of say big change here is that you can jump into the test rule parameter. But to do that, I want to do something first. In my lower view here, I'm going to navigate to my device view, and I'm going to click into a one of these devices like that has NA in the name. I'm going to just double click on this device. It opens up my detailed view on the top, and you might be looking at this view. If you navigate over to your config view, this view is going to show you the last configuration. So what I'm going to do is grab this config. I'm just going to copy it out of here, and I'll do a Control-C. Now I'm going to go back to my audit. So here I am auditing for NTP, and I want to navigate into test rule. So in test rule, in your test data, this is where you want to put example configuration data. So I'm going to Control-V and paste the config in here. So now you can see I have a full-blown Cisco router config sitting in here. Now I'm going to test this rule that's looking for, it happens to be, I can see that what it's looking for right here, the NTP configuration. And if you just make your window long enough here, I can hit test, and I can test the rule. So here I see the outcome where it has given me the output and saying, based on what you just built, this is going to pass. So you have a good and pass condition here. So once you've tested it, you cancel out of the test view. If you close this, you're going to close your whole tab. So don't close. You can reopen it. It's not a problem. But what you want to do is just cancel out of the test view and you're back here. So now you've tested and validated your rule. So let me go ahead and hit back. Let's take this one step further, and I'll edit this next rule, which expands the logic you can build. And I'm hoping network engineers seeing this are going to appreciate that this no-code approach, you don't have to know any underlying code or semantic, just a little bit of regex is helpful, and obviously knowing the CLI you want to audit for. We're going to expand this by doing an if-then-else operator. So if the host name contains NA for North America, it must, if then it must contain these servers. And then I have an else condition that I still want to validate NTP is configured, but let's just say that outside North America, I'm using a lot of different NTP IPs or whatever may be the case. So I just have a regex wildcard here, and I want to validate that all my other devices at least have NTP configured. They don't necessarily have to have the IPs for North America. And again, I can test the rule, and I see the config is still here, and here's the then, so I can test it. Obviously, we've already tested this one. Now I can continue to test the else. And so we can say, will this config, if it doesn't have NA in the name, will it actually pass the else parameter? I can hit test, and it passes the else parameter too. So you can have some fun with this. These are no-code ways to build audits, and I'll go ahead and cancel out of here. But hopefully you can see here the power of this next generation of audit gives you the ability to define the severity of the rule and define much more complicated rules to edit and assess your install base. So the last thing to mention here is that while we are pretty significantly edited and enhanced the ability for more complex rules, I do want to highlight that, and let me jump back out to the summary here. Any of your existing audit policies will be converted into this format, and you don't lose anything. So really backwards compatibility from a running standpoint. But when you do execute and kind of go into your rules, and let me just navigate back into like this Cisco CIS example. As you navigate into the rules, and that's the result view. Let me go back into editing of the. The old rules will be imported in as simple rules. So that's just something to be aware of. But you obviously still have the ability to import and export your audit policies like you have in the past. So if once you're done editing and you're happy with this, you can download it out and save it out in JSON format and share it with your peers. And also just a reminder that you can go to the Gluware customer portal, and we have quite a few example audits, including Cisco iOS audits and Junos audits as well for some of the security specifications out there. So this concludes the demonstration on the new and enhanced Config Audit.